ya? Welcome to Happy Rails to ya. My name is Hobo Pap, and I've been riding the rails looking for an adventure to share with you. Boy, have I got a story for you today. Let me find a place to rest these weary bones. We'll see what treasure I've got for you in my bindle. You know, my hobo sack. Come along. Welcome back to Hobo Pap's Hobo Jungle. I hope you've had a good week, and I hope you're enjoying the fall season. I know I sure am. You know, as we've read numerous stories here on Hobo Pap's Happy Rails to you, we've learned about all kinds of trains. Freight trains, passenger trains, monorails, diesel trains, steam trains, elevated trains, and even underground trains. You know, as I hopped a rattler on the Long Island Railroad this past week and traveled by New York City, I figured it's high time to learn a little more about underground trains, better known as subways. Millions of folks ride New York City's underground trains each and every day, so I thought it would be fitting to read an adventure about its first subway called the Secret Subway. Now, as we read through this story, be sure to pay close attention to all the details in the pictures, as this book was illustrated with models made out of wire, foam, and clay, posed along with the train and backdrops made out of cardboard and paper, then photographed to help tell this technological tale. Now, this true story begins all the way back in the 1860s, so come along, let's read. The Secret Subway, written by Shanna Corey and illustrated by Red Nose Studio. Welcome to New York City, the greatest city on earth. You say it looks crowded, dirty, disgusting? The streets are filled with garbage? Well, you're right. See, back in the 1860s, when this story begins, there were no subways here, only cobblestone streets. Push carts and wagons rocked and rumbled. Stagecoaches and buggies jounced and jumbled. Horses kicked up dirt, and drivers shouted to be heard. People pressed their way through it all, trying not to get run over. And it just kept getting worse. Something had to be done. From politicians to peddlers, street sweepers to scientists, everyone had ideas. Why not make a moving street so we can get wherever we want just by standing still? What about building double-decker roads or a railway on stilts? But no matter how much everyone talked, nothing ever seemed to get off the ground. Then one day, high above it all, a man named Alfred Eli Beach stared down at the traffic and had an idea of his own. Beach was a thinker, a publisher, and an inventor. His father had owned a newspaper, and Beach had grown up in a simmering soup of letters and words and newfangled notions. He was also a man of action, and if there was one thing he loved more than thinking up ideas, it was making them happen. As Beach studied the street below, the wheels in his brain turned. What if he built a train powered by an enormous fan, he wondered. It would travel underground where there was no traffic or trash or weather to worry about. People would get where they needed to go as if by magic. Beach couldn't wait to get started. He was certain his train could take New York into the future. But there was a roadblock. The streets didn't belong to him. And since this would be a great big messy complicated job, permission to tunnel under them would not come easily. So Beach hatched a sneaky plan. He would propose building an underground tube to carry meal instead. It wouldn't be that big, it wouldn't be that messy, it wouldn't be that complicated. No one could object. A mail tube? Why not? People said. Even Boss Tweed agreed. See, Boss Tweed ran New York City, unofficially that is. Beach got permission, but he had more on his mind than meal. Beach rented the basement of Devlin's clothing store. Every day, he sent an army of workers into its depths. And every night, after most folks had long been in bed, when even Boss Tweed lay tucked in tight, wagons pulled up in front of the store. The workers tiptoed out and loaded the wagons with pile after pile of dirt and rocks. Then the wagons rolled back into the night. For 58 days and nights, Beach's men tunneled beneath the cobblestones, sewers, and pipes, moving 16 inches of earth with every press of the tunneling machine, up to 8 feet a day. Until one night, the workers ran straight into a stone wall. If they removed it, the men knew the whole tunnel might collapse, but they had come too far to stop. So stone by stone, breath by breath, they took the wall down. And when they were done, the tunnel still stood. Then one night, the drilling stopped. The tunnel, 8 feet across and 294 feet long, big enough to hold a train full of people, lined with brick and iron, was complete. Now a new army of workers arrived carrying paintbrushes and plaster, curtains and mirrors. When they were done, Devlin's basement resembled a fairyland. Perfect, thought Alfred Eli Beach. It was time to share his secret. A few days later, distinguished citizens, reporters, and government officials all over New York opened the mail and found an invitation. At precisely 2 o'clock on February 26th, Beach's guests left the city streets and descended into Devlin's. Then, one by one, they entered Beach's spectacular subterranean waiting room. Beach had thought of everything. Gaslights glowed, illuminating paintings and flowers, and a fountain that glittered with goldfish. A grandfather clock rang in the hour, and a grand piano played. There was even a tasty lunch spread out on a table. The guests followed Beach down 6 more steps onto a train platform. A single car waited on the tracks. "Remarkable," marveled one reporter. "The railroad of the future," agreed another. "The problem of tunneling Broadway has been solved," cheered the newspapers. That first day, guests simply admired the train. But it wasn't long before the tunnel was opened to the public and throngs of visitors climbed aboard. With a flourish, an engineer turned on the great fan. Then, swoosh! A blast of air pushed the train down the tracks. At the end of the tunnel, the train set off a bell. The engineer pulled the rope, and whoosh! The fan sucked the train back again. Beach's train was a sensation. All winter, while wagons slipped and slid on the slushy streets above, people poured into Devlin's for the 25-cent ride. It looked as though Beach's plan was going to work. But wait, some folks weren't so sure about Beach's big idea. Shopkeepers wanted their customers to stay above the ground. Property owners worried that all that tunneling might not be good for the buildings. Others wondered if it might give Beach too much power. And remember Boss Tweed? Well, by now, some of his friends had come up with their own plan for a railroad, and Tweed looked out for his friends. He wasn't going to let some crackpot inventor cut into their business. The governor denied Beach's request to expand. Screech! The underground train was stopped in its tracks. As time passed and the train didn't go any farther, the city's curiosity wore off and the stream of visitors slowed to a drip. Deep down in the quiet heart of the city, away from the clattering and the clanging above, Beach turned off the great fan and sighed. Oh well, there would be other ideas, but he had shown New York that one day people might move beneath the streets as if by magic. By 1874, the train that went nowhere had closed. Beach rented out the tunnel as a shooting gallery, and eventually it was abandoned altogether. It might even have been forgotten. But many years later, drilling could be heard once again under the streets of New York City. Another underground train, run on electricity, was being built. Workers found lots of surprises as they tunneled. A sunken ship beneath the battery, mastodon bones near Dickman Street, subterranean streams in Midtown, and quicksand not far from City Hall. And in February 1912, 42 years after Beach unveiled his train, they ran into a brick wall. When the workers broke through, they found themselves inside Beach's tunnel. There was even a little railroad car rusting in its tracks and a tunneling machine perched at the end, ready to lead the way forward. The end. That's the secret subway. Well, I hope you found this story as fascinating as I did. Alfred Beach was quite an intellectual inventor. He was the co-owner and co-editor of the Scientific American magazine, and he came up with the idea that pneumatic power, which is the power to move things with air pressure, could be used to help New York City's traffic problems back in the 1800s. Now, taking the idea of pneumatic tubes being used to move mail in London, he debuted his idea of an air pressure driven passenger train in a large tube as opposed to a traditional steam driven train way back at New York's American Institute Fair in 1867. Now, Beach couldn't get his permission to build this railroad under the streets of New York City, but he did get permission and funding to build two small underground pneumatic mail tubes. What politicians and residents didn't know was that while he built these two mail tubes, he also built a much larger tube, his secret subway, which ran between Warren and Murray Streets near Broadway in Lower Manhattan. Powered by air pressure, the Beach Pneumatic Transit ran under New York City from February 26, 1870 until April of 1873. Now, although America's first underground trains began running in Boston in 1897, New York City broke ground on its first official underground train on March 24, 1900, and the first New York City electric-powered subway line was completed and opened on October 27, 1904. But 42 years after Beach built his secret subway, his original tunnel was destroyed in 1912 and became the section of New York subway known today as the City Hall station under Broadway. Today, New York City's subway system runs on 656 miles of railroad track, with an additional 186 miles of track in its rail yards, shops, and storage areas, for a whopping total of 842 miles of track. Alfred Eli Beach truly was a mastermind, and his genius helped change passenger transit by rail forever. Well, that's it for this week. Until next time, so long. Thank you for joining me for today's adventure. I hope you enjoyed. Always remember, continue riding the rails of your imagination, as it will take you on an endless number of adventures around the world. Until next time, this is Hobo Pap saying so long, as I go hop on a rattler in search of our next adventure. Happy rails to you.